Hello, everyone. This is Kyle Davison Bear coming to you from the Hope You're Curious YouTube channel and the pastorkyle.substack.com blog. And the video today will be a bit different. This will be a response video to Nick Brasing and Josh Bowen. I produced a 20-minute video summarizing my argument that the Bible abolishes slavery. Nick and Josh took that video and produced about an hour and 25-minute long video response to that. So this video is my response to them. And I'll actually break this video up into three, loosely organized around Exodus 21, Deuteronomy 23, and Leviticus 25, just so it's a bit more digestible to go through that way. And so I'll get into their specific claims here in a second, but before I do, I just want to say from the outset, well, first of all, Nick and Josh, I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate the chance to dig deep here and that you have been willing to dialogue with me about this. I do appreciate that. And what I'd like to just clarify from the outset that this position I'm arguing for, I'm not coming into this blind. My academic achievements are somewhat between the two of yours. Josh, you mentioned you have a PhD. Nick, you mentioned you were self-trained. I received my Bachelor's of Biblical and Theological Studies from Wheaton College, and then my Master of Divinity from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, part of Trinity International University. And if anyone in the audience doesn't know what a Master of Divinity degree is, well, suppose you have a Master of New Testament. That would typically be 2 years long. The Master of Divinity is a 4-year long program because you're not only learning one discipline like the study of the New Testament, you're learning every discipline. So yes, you're learning Greek and studying the New Testament. You're also learning Hebrew and studying the Old Testament in the original language. You're learning the history of interpretation, not just our stream, but all the major streams. You're learning how to preach, how to teach, how to study, how to counsel, how to write. The Master of Divinity was an incredible toolbox, not just teaching you what to think, but how to think. So that whatever you did, whether you stayed within academia or you went off and worked professionally, you had all the tools you could possibly need for that. And so I chose to go professionally and begin ministering to people and helping people in the local church. But I've always kept this academic study kind of in the background as a hobby. And on this particular topic, I've been really digging into this for the last 10, 15 years, just doing a ton of research, writing, dialoguing, interacting. And so the brief 20-minute video that you saw has about 20 years of academic and personal study feeding into it. And yes, I framed it in a certain way that I believe you even called extreme. I'll explain in a little bit in response to one of your points why I do that, why I frame it this way. That's not an accident, it's very deliberate. And so, yeah, let's get into this.
I think in my estimation, it really seems to come down to a couple of verses, and everything else he refers back to those and goes, I know this sounds like it says this, which it does, but it can't mean that,
right?
Because remember these two verses we talked about earlier that mean this. So it all kind of goes back to Exodus 21:16 and Deuteronomy.
Yes, you're correct that in the 20-minute video, I do anchor things on Exodus 21:16 and Deuteronomy 23:15-16. By no means are those the only verses in my argument. Again, I'm writing a full book on this, and I go through, there's just a plethora of verses throughout the scriptures that feed into this. But when you're communicating this idea to an audience for the first time, you need to give them some kind of anchor to just hold in their minds to frame everything else around. And so Exodus 21 and Deuteronomy 23 are excellent framing verses for that. They really do frame the discussion. They're easy to understand. You can grasp them within your mind, and then you can build the rest of the case around those. So yes, in this video, I focus on those two. By no means are those the only verses relevant to this topic. Secondly, about the idea that I'm saying, the text says this, but it can't mean that, that's not my argument. My argument is that what the text actually says is fine, especially when you read it within the original languages. It's the assumptions we bring to the text that are not part of the text that are the problem. So take for Leviticus 25 just for a quick example, where it says that you can acquire people to work for you from the nations around you. What we assume when we read that is the American South. We assume slave traders, we assume slave markets, and those things are all horrible. None of them are in the text. Not only are they not in the text, in Leviticus 25, they're not within any text throughout any of the Old Testament narratives. They're present in the land in Genesis. You see Joseph sold to slave traders, but once Israel takes over the land and starts to live by this law God gives, slave traders disappear completely. Slave markets are entirely absent. Despite the economies of nearly every ancient society being built on slavery, they are curiously absent from Israel. And so my argument is not so much to say that it says this, but it doesn't mean that. No, no. It means what it says. The problem is what we assume about it that it is not saying, that we assume it's saying. We assume it says you can buy from slave traders and slave markets when it doesn't. We assume it means you're getting people to work for you who have been forced into slavery against their will. It doesn't say that. Those are the things we assume about it that are not true, that make the text seem horrible. When you clear those assumptions away and you get back to only what the meaning on the text was, and you understand the words in light of the context, in light of how those words are used elsewhere throughout the Torah, the meaning becomes clear. That's my argument.
And so I thought we'd go through the lead up to that, but I thought what we would start with is just the title of the video, which is, what does the Bible say about slavery? It abolishes slavery from the beginning. I think it's from the beginning, from the start. So, Dr. Josh, does the Bible abolish slavery from the start? I guess would be a good starting point.
I mean, I don't think so. I don't know an academic that would say so. I think when
Abolish
uh,
seems like a very strong word. And he's
yeah,
got
I
it
mean,
all
I
in
think
caps, so he feels very strongly about this.
I think you'd be very hard pressed to say has a negative view, like a negative moral view.
Yes, I do use the word abolish, and I do say it strongly. My position is actually not too far off the mainstream. The reason I package it this way is because we have done a terrible job communicating what the Bible says about these topics to the general audience. A lot of the nuance is lost. If we try to describe the type, if you phrase it as like there was a slavery in the antebellum South and there was a slavery in the Bible, but they were very different, and slaves in the Bible had rights that slaves in the antebellum South didn't have, the nuance gets lost, and it just sounds like, yeah, they both had slavery. But you cannot equate slavery in the antebellum South with what goes on in Exodus 21, for example. They are entirely different animals with entirely different rights. And so using the same word to describe two very different things is the problem. That's why I say it abolishes slavery, because in the modern mind, when we use the word slavery, what we think of is the antebellum South. We think of slaves forced into slavery against their will, kidnapped from Africa, shipped across the ocean, um, put up on auction, taken to plantations, whipped in the back, brutalized. If they're killed, who cares? They're not really people. Like, that's what we conceive of as slavery, and that's evil. That's horrible. When we say the word slavery, that's what comes to mind. That's not what Exodus or Deuteronomy or Leviticus are describing. And that's why I'm insisting we use a different word. I'm saying that what we think of as slavery is abolished by the scriptures. They do not support what happened in the antebellum South. And so, even though I come at this strongly, and yes, I use the word abolish, my position is not that hard to reach. If you take the passages we're considering and you simply blank out the word, that some translations would say slave or slavery, you blank them out, you hand it to a person who has never read it before, and you say, okay, look at this passage, look at the context, from these clues, try to guess what goes in that space. If you do that, you're halfway to my argument already, because the passages themselves, the context within them, do not support anything like the antebellum South. And so when you put a word that conjures the antebellum South into passages that are not describing it, we're doing an injustice to the average reader, to the average person who encounters this. So when I say the Bible abolishes slavery, I'm much closer to your position than you think. I'm merely communicating it differently. Because when you say the Bible condones slavery, all people think of is the American South and all of its horrors. They do not appreciate how different the situation was. And this is not a problem the translators are unaware of. You mentioned yourself the roundtable, I think it was from Tyndale, where they discussed this. Should they use the word slave? Should they use servant? What does it conjure in the mind of the reader? It's exactly the problem. It's a very well known translation difficulty in these passages. I'm just adding my voice to the chorus, saying that using slave in these passages is planting thoughts in the mind of the reader that are not present on the page. And whenever we're doing that, as translators, as scholars, as pastors, whatever we are, it's doing a huge injustice. We're communicating things to the audience that are not being communicated from the page, but rather from our cultural assumptions. That's dangerous, and that's what we need to avoid.
I think that would be difficult. I think the most that you could say about slavery in the Hebrew Bible, as far as their attitudes about it, is you don't want to be a slave, right? it's not that there's some moral, component attached to that necessarily. It's just something you don't want because it's, there are better ways to live, right? Better
Right,
ways
and
to
there are
be.
verses in the Bible like the Second Kings um, little story where it says the that my husband has died and the lender is coming to take my two sons as a slave. Now those were Hebrews, so it wasn't quite as bad for them. But even in that scenario, it wasn't something that she was going, "Oh yay,
Right.
he's coming to take my
Exactly.
sons."
All right, and here I will push back a little bit because this is the problem we have when we use one collective term, slavery, to refer to both the abuses that you witnessed in the antebellum South and a legitimate form of service where the rights of the individual are respected. When you use one term to refer to both of those, you get this kind of confusion. My pushback is to say that the abuses that you witnessed in the antebellum South, those are routinely condemned and spoken of as evil by the scriptures. But the perfectly normal service industry where the rights of the person are respected, that is present throughout the scriptures, and that is spoken of as okay. Unfortunately, people use slavery, the term slavery, to refer to that kind of service where the rights are respected, which is not slavery. And that's part of the whole communication difficulty and why I phrase things the way I do. Now, you provided a good example here with 2 Kings 4, because the widow in this situation, it's a great evil to her that her children are being taken by this creditor, and Elisha views it as evil. He doesn't just say, well, you have to be a law respecting Israelite, you have to let them take your children away. That's what the law says. No, he doesn't treat it that way. He treats it as evil and he helps her get out of it because there is no provision in the law that allows the children of a man after he has died to be taken to pay his debt. There is no provision in the law that allows such a thing. This is taking place in the northern kingdom of Israel under the reign of Joram, and to say that they had fallen far away from the law of Israel would be an understatement. That the northern kingdom of Israel at this time was very, very pagan, had borrowed a lot of practices from the surrounding nation, and this appears to be one of them. Because what do we witness when the governance is trying as hard as they can to follow the law of God? Nehemiah 5 tells us. In Nehemiah 5, people come to Nehemiah complaining that they've had to sell their sons and daughters because these creditors, the rich people, are just making life impossible for them. They have no recourse but to sell their children. It enrages Nehemiah. He calls everyone in. He rebukes them harshly because they had just redeemed Israel from the nations, brought them back to the land, and now the people in the land are creating the situation where they have to sell people again. And he just rebukes them so harshly. He commands them immediately to repent, swears them to it, and they do. There's not a single, well, this is normal, creditors. No, it's just evil. Repent, we're not doing this. That's what you see when the governance is trying to follow the law of God. So, no, I do not buy that they just treat slavery as normal. No, what we think of as slavery, the Bible routinely condemns.
Yeah. I mean, so yeah, I mean, I think I think if you're trying to make the argument as this individual in the video is on, I think what is just simply a misunderstanding of what's going on in the ancient world. Um,
It seems
yeah,
to
I
me
mean,
that it's more taken as a fact of life,
yeah,
slavery, just like every other ancient Near Eastern nation at
yeah,
the time.
yeah,
There's slavery. What are the rules around it going to be?
It's not a misunderstanding, it's a different way of framing what is going on. Because again, we use the same term to refer to wildly different things, and it's leading to no end of confusion. The legitimate service industry where the rights of the people are delineated and respected, that is what you're referring to as present throughout the land. The abuses of the antebellum South, that is what I'm saying, are not present and are in fact outlawed by the specific verses we'll get into later. So, no, I'm not trying to say that what you call slavery is not present. Unfortunately, what you call slavery is present, but what you call slavery is not what anybody else in the modern audience would conceive of as slavery. It just you see the confusion we have with this term. And again, we'll get into this later with when we dig into the word ebed. And yes, I will defend my pronunciation of ebed when we get there. That word refers to service at every level of society, from the highest down to the lowest. And just because a small minority of the times that word is used to refer to slavery, we can't refer to every time that word is used as slavery, because most of the time it is used, it does not describe what we would conceive of as slavery. So, no, I understand very well what's going on in the text. It is not a misunderstanding. I'm trying to reframe what's going on so that when a modern audience hears what's going on, the words that they hear convey the reality of what's going on. And you're not assuming things into the text from your cultural understanding of what a term means, but you're actually able to see what is really present in the text.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the rules in the Hebrew Bible are fairly consistent with other nations of the time, broadly speaking. Some maybe a little better, some maybe a little worse.
Yeah. Given the data that we have, I mean, that's
right. It was a long time ago.
Yeah. I mean,
I'll disagree with you here for two reasons. The first is that a lot of the laws given to Israel are specifically created to set them apart from the surrounding nations, to make them distinct, to make them holy. The prohibition against eating pork, for example, one of the primary ways you can distinguish an ancient Israelite town or layer of habitation versus the surrounding cultures is the absence of pig bones. Many of these laws were created to set Israel apart. And when you're looking at a law code designed to do that, you need to pay attention to these distinctions. You can't just assume and fill in the gaps from the nations around them. And that feeds into the second point, where many of these laws that relate to the situation we're talking about of service and slavery within Israel, many of those laws are unique and without precedent. I know you hate that word, but many of them are, such as Leviticus 19:18, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, and the laws commanding the treating of foreigners, that you shall love the foreigner as yourself because you were a foreigner within Egypt. These laws are unprecedented. And I will argue that Exodus 21:16 and Deuteronomy 23 are likewise without compare, without direct equal in these other ancient law codes. And I already know your objection. You get to it many times here in the video, so we'll discuss it more in detail when we get there.
But here is his first entrance into the Hebrew, which I don't get the impression that he reads. I don't either, so no judgment there. But Josh does. So the Eved, the word for slaves. Now he's starting with Leviticus 25:44 through 46, and I'd just like your thoughts on what he thinks it means. I agree with him on some of what he says, but I think he takes it a little far. So let's listen to what he has to say here.
What it says. Because the Bible, of course, wasn't written in English. It was written in Hebrew a long time ago. And the way it uses words is different than the way we use words. So when we read Leviticus 25:44, as for your male and female slaves whom you may have, you may buy male and female slaves, we just assume there's some Hebrew word that means slave. And we assume that where the text said that, the translators just wrote slave in English for the Hebrew word that means slave, and that's what we assume, right? Except that's wrong. That doesn't exist. There is no Hebrew word that just means slave. Instead, the word is ebed. In English, it sounds like
I have to point out here that he did pronounce it correctly.
Well, he got the accent right. It's not
right.
a hard B.
It's not
B, but
yeah. It took me forever once I
heard
it. It took me forever once I heard it pronounced to stop pronouncing it incorrectly. So
right, at least he didn't say like abade or abode or So
yeah, or I've heard people say abad, which is the etymology of it. But anyway, pronunciation, gold star.
EBED, ebed. I won't go into how to spell it in Hebrew right now, but just to stay focused. That word ebed appears about 800 times in the Old Testament.
Could you just pause it
and
95% for a second? So I don't like that. So I know from having studied and taught Hebrew now for 2 decades plus, like I can tell when somebody knows Hebrew.
Okay.
Right? He doesn't. Nobody that knows Hebrew would pronounce the word that's on the screen with a hard B, right? Unless it's a dialectical thing, which it's not for him. And even then, I don't know that there would be a hard B there. It's clearly spirantized, right? There's no dagesh in the bait. So, and you learn that week 3 studying Hebrew, right? It's part of learning the alphabet and the vowel pointing. So nobody's gonna, unless they're again, unless they're just making consistent mistakes. But that's a pretty big mistake to make. That word is pronounced eved, and you just, if you know Hebrew and you're keeping up with it at all. So for him to make this statement, like, I'm not going to go into the spelling of Hebrew, it's feigning that he knows this language. And, it's complicated. I'm just not going to go into it right now. Well, I call bullshit, right? I call bullshit.
Okay.
That if he knows Hebrew, I'll eat my hat.
As I mentioned at the start, I did learn biblical Hebrew as part of my Master of Divinity degree. And, part of what you say is definitely correct. If you are to read this word within the text, it would be pronounced with a V. The reason I say it abed with a B is because of the dictionary spelling, the unpointed three consonant spelling. If you look it up in BDB or wherever and you see it, the pronunciation given, abed is how they spell it out. Because I'm referring to its usage all throughout the Old Testament, I'm referring to multiple verses where this appears. I just use that one consistent pronunciation for it. Because most of the audience I'm writing to does not understand Hebrew, and if I change the pronunciation to match the pointing in each specific case, it would just be a nightmare. So I use that one specific eved to refer to the word in all those situations. But yes, you're correct that if you read it as part of the text, it would have the V sound, such as Exodus 21 2. The ki tikne eved ivari shesh shanim ya'avod. Both the eved for the servant and ya'avod, he shall serve. Both of them have the V sound. So you're correct that in the text, when you read it, it does have that V sound. I don't mean to imply otherwise, but I did realize one mistake on my part, that I meant to just have the three consonants on that slide. I realized I must have copied something that had vowel pointings, and you're right. With the vowel pointings on there, it would not be pronounced ebed. So that part is correct, and that was the oversight on my part. I do apologize for that. But yes, I did learn biblical Hebrew. I have not taught it for 20 years as you have. I do not claim to have your level of expertise with Hebrew, but yes, I have learned it at the graduate level. Percent of the time it appears it has nothing whatsoever to do with slavery, which should shock you, because most people, again, see the word slave in the verse and they assume there's a Hebrew word that means slave and that's the word being used. Except it's not, because ebed doesn't mean slave. Ebed means one who serves. And you don't know what kind of service is being talked about unless you know who they're serving and how they're serving.
Okay,
Because that word
pause it
ebed,
for a second. So I want to put this into linguistic context. Okay.
Okay.
This is the equivalent to saying, if you see the word run, you might assume that it means like somebody like running down the street. But it does, there is no word in English for someone running down the street, right? No, that only means running down the street. Because the word run can be, in the millions and millions of times that it gets used in English writing, right? It can mean like water running or a nose running or a car running, or like you would hear me say that if I were trying to make an argument that like Jackie Joyner Kersee were not sprinting down the track when it says Jackie Joyner Kersee ran in the race, that it must mean something like she was taking a light jog, right? Like you would say
Right.
that's a really stupid point to make, Josh. Yeah, of course, words are polyvalent. Yeah, the word run can mean all kinds of things. It's the context that drives the meaning, of course.
Exactly.
So this to me is just a smokescreen sort of argument.
Yeah, I appreciate this because you're essentially making my case for me here. But yes, I am saying that words have multiple meanings and you must understand them based on context. Yes, to you and I, this is obvious because we have studied multiple different languages. It is obvious once you get to the level and you're studying language like that, that you must understand the context to understand how to translate a word. But the average person does not appreciate that distinction, especially with the level of variance that a word like abed has. For them to understand that the same word refers both to Messiah as the suffering servant and to a slave, someone stolen away from their freedom and sold to slave traders. For them to understand the same word refers to both concepts is just a foreign idea to the vast majority of people who are reading the Bible. And so, yes, I do take the time to spell this out because it is an assumption that people make wrongly about the text. There is no singular Hebrew word that means a slave and only slave. And if people think there is, they assume something wrongly about the text and about the translation. So, if I'm going to make a case that the context is not yielding itself to something like the antebellum South kind of slavery, I need to start by building this assumption so people understand why I can even say such a thing. So yeah, I know it seems second nature to you, it seems obvious, but it is a key part of the argument if you are trying to appeal to a public who does not understand Hebrew.
Well, yeah,
Uh,
it's basically saying that it can mean a lot of different things, which it can, but one of those freaking things is slave.
yeah, that's right.
Okay. And we're discussing those instances where
Yeah.
it means slave.
Yes.
The fact that it can mean, that Jesus was an Ebed at one time as well. Okay, but that's different than what we're talking about.
Now, this is a strange critique to respond to because you're repeating what I've already said, but the tone is kind of as if it's refuting what I've said, even though it's stuff I already agree with. Yes, of course, Ebed can mean slave. I've said so directly. And there are places within the text where it should be translated slave. For example, when Egypt enslaved Israel. Egypt brutalized the Israelites, forced them to do backbreaking work until it killed them. They killed Israelite babies to control the population. So, yes, that was slavery, and it's appropriate to translate Ebed as slave in that context because that's what we think of in the modern mind when we think of the word slave. It fits. The problem is that Ebed refers to so many different things beyond that. So when you look at Exodus 21, for example, so many of the provisions prevent exactly the abuses of slavery that you witnessed with Egypt and Israel. So in Exodus 21, 26, if the master hits the servant and causes the smallest permanent injury, such as knocking out a tooth, that servant is instantly released. They do not have to stay around and put up with the abuse. So they cannot be brutalized in the way that the Egyptians brutalized the Israelites. Exodus 21:20, if the master kills the servant, that servant is avenged. The master is punished as a murderer. It's exactly the opposite of Egypt, where they could kill their workers and nobody cared, where they could kill the children of the Israelites and there was no reprisal. So these situations are so completely opposite, so completely distinct. And so when you use the same word to refer to both, it is just needlessly confusing, if not downright deceptive. When you use the word slave in Exodus 21, people think about what the Egyptians did to the Israelites, even though the text is specifically prohibiting that. So that's my argument that the words we're using are not accurately conveying in our minds what's going on in the text, and it is leading to no end of confusion in the audiences when we're talking about these things. So this word can mean anything from Messiah to a rich man to a soldier to a worker in a field and occasionally to a slave.
It
The
can't.
same word refers to
It's
all those
the
different
way to
positions.
say that, and this might seem a little pedantic. It's not to say it can mean a rich man. It can mean a soldier. It can be applied to someone who is rich. It can be applied to someone who is a soldier. But the question that you need to ask yourself is why is it that, and this is not just in Hebrew, this is in Semitic in general. So you see this in Akkadian with the word wardum. Why is it that in the Amarna letters, the kings that are ruling right over their little territorial their little areas, their cities in Canaan, why are they writing to the Pharaoh saying, "Your servant writes to you"? Right? Why do they say like 7 times I bow before bow at your feet? Why do they say that? They're not the Pharaoh's slaves, right? In the sense that they're not like working in his house or working in his field. They're kings. So why would they call themselves Wardu? Why would they call themselves and use this imagery, use this metaphor, if you want to do it that way, to describe themselves as people that are subservient, right? People that are in this, utilizing this term that is used for the guy that is unpaid, that is owned as property, that's working in your field or working in the house. Like why does he use this? And it's like it's because the if we think of the Venn diagram, the meanings of these, or the usages of this term, like they overlap, right? And they overlap. There's a reason that he's applying it, is the point that I'm making. So yeah, like this is just a non-starter argument.
And again, this is another place where you're repeating what I've said, but somehow acting like it's disagreeing with me. What you just described is part of my argument. That yes, the word overlaps. There is that Venn diagram of meaning. There is the overlap, the subservience, the I am your servant. Why does the king use the same term, applying it to himself, that can also apply to the guy in the field being whipped? Like, that's exactly the point, that this word does have such a wide range of meanings. And yes, a king can apply it to himself. It can be used to refer to the guy working out in the field. Yes, that's the problem. That's the situation I'm describing. So again, this is a really weird situation where you're just repeating my argument, but acting like it's somehow destroying my argument. So how do you know what's being talked about when the same word describes it all? Again, it comes down to context. You have to know what's being described, who it's talking about, what the situation is before you know what that word actually means. And so when we come into Leviticus 25 and we see that word, the translators have made a choice of what it means. And unfortunately, what they've chosen in a lot of translations is wrong. Not
I don't know if you want to comment on some translations that don't use the word slave here or not. It's tough to get into their minds.
Yeah. I mean,
Is it wrong?
Well, again, I would just be very surprised if this young man knows this language. And if he doesn't know this language, and I would say doesn't know this language at a pretty, high intermediate level, at least, it's a bold claim
That's what I thought.
to say the translators got it wrong.
Yes, let me just take a second to clarify what I am saying and what I'm not saying. Yes, I've learned Hebrew, but no, I'm not trying to say that I know it better than the translators. That would be ridiculous. I'm not putting myself above them. But as you pointed out, there is a growing number of translations now that are not using slave in this passage. They're using words like servant or men servants and maid servants because they're recognizing that the word slave in the modern mind just comes with so much baggage that when you see that word in this text, you assume things about the text that are not true, and that words like servant or men servant and maid servant better convey what's going on here. So I'm not putting myself above the translators. I'm joining that team of people. I'm adding my voice to the growing chorus of voices who are saying that we need better words here, that words like servant better reflect what's going on within the text. All right, yeah, so like I said at the start, we're going to split this up into 3 different pieces. We're going to pause here now because this is a bit over half an hour. I want to keep this relatively digestible. So parts 2 and 3 will be coming. The links for that will be down below, or they'll pop up on your screen now when those are out. They'll be out in a couple of days. But yeah, Nick and Josh, I appreciate this discussion. Yeah, part 2 coming at you soon.